I had this principle that I call like a lemonade stand principle. And I have to ask myself, what makes a person stop at my lemonade stand versus a competitor's?
Meet Johnathan and I. He's the founder of KlientBoost, a performance marketing agency that's worked with brands like AirBNB, UpWork, NPR, and more. I met him back in 2015 when KlientBoost was starting out, and he pitched me something incredibly cool. Flash forward, and KlientBoost has grown to over 20 million ARR, has over 350 reviews, and has been named GlassDoor's #1 place to work.
Who's going to give a shit about this piece of content? Can it be funny and educational at the same time?
In this episode, we discuss how creating a wildly differentiated brand leads to massive growth, a framework for strategic outreach and distribution, and how to leverage experimental formats to stand out wherever you show up. I'm Tommy Walker, my guest is Johnathan Dane, and this is The Cutting Room. Johnathan, tell us about your content marketing philosophy and how has it evolved over time?
So content philosophy, I'll start with this. It's very much the 80-20 rule for me. Very much the basics, almost like a gut check that I've kind of like intuition from day one has been really, really strong. And I had this principle that I call like a lemonade stand principle. And I basically think of the internet as a street where I have a lemonade stand, like that's my store, that's my business. And my competitors have also lemonade stands on that same street. And I have to ask myself, with an offer that I come out with, my fresh squeezed lemonade, like what makes a person stop at my lemonade stand versus a competitor's lemonade stand? And my sign is equivalent to a piece of content, right? This was back in 2015 when we started, where we were very much, I think the SEO content world was very much listicle driven. It felt like skyscraper technique as well at that time was on top of it. And so it was a lot of that to begin with. And like, okay, if somebody were to choose a blog post in the Google search results, would they choose, 9 pizza recipes or would they choose 17 pizza recipes? Well, back then they would choose 17. So that was one quantifiable difference in my lemonade stand that I focused on as well too. The other ones were design, that I went to you guys at Shopify Plus, and we had no business asking you guys to be our partner, but we also got HubSpot, we got Envision, we got Marketo, we did 25 different companies of the 25 days in December during that time. And we were swinging, way above our weight class, coming with this gifographic and saying, we'll do all the heavy lifting, we'll do all the animation. You guys just got to put your logo next to ours and we're good to go. So I also knew that design wise, with our, cute, fun characters and our personality through that, was another element of our content that kind of just felt like made us more approachable. Clients on calls would anecdotally tell us that like they just felt like we were warmer of an agency. We didn't take ourselves too seriously as well too. And it's kind of evolved now to be more of like a first party data centric focus for us, like listicles and skyscraper technique, not so much anymore, but more on experiences and tools that we want to build. We have, for example, we're coming out with a stock chart of like the average cost per clicks on Google ads, LinkedIn ads, like, different things like that. So we can actually be the source of truth now. So that's kind of how it's evolved.
All right. I dig that. Now, one of the things that I think is interesting, because you guys have grown so much in the last 7 years since we met. I think so.
Yeah. Has it been like that?
Is
9 years?
I think so. Yeah. 7, 8 years. It's crazy. Is that, and I want to go back to what you were saying just a minute ago, where you were using the resources you had available to you at the time. And then as things have grown, you've been able to change and evolve with more interactive experiences and whatnot. Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about the importance, I think, of using those resources you have available and where your mindset was around that, because I think there's an awful lot to learn. I know that a lot of content people, a lot of content teams, they want to make those big swings. And you were like, I have design resources and an internet connection. Like, tell me about that.
I think it started with our confidence being very high to begin with, because I was just looking at the content that competitors were producing, and there were all these different levels to it, right? There's just like, hey, one, are you giving something of value to the reader and not just scratching the back of Google, but actually scratching the back of the individual as well too. So our resources were essentially just like myself. I was the content writer for all those gifographics that you saw. I actually did it. And then I was also the salesperson reaching out, or the marketing partner reaching out. And again, coming with that confidence of saying, like, if we have something unique, that the world hasn't been seen or heard much of, I know that they're more likely to say yes. If it was just a random piece of content or a blog post, they probably would not, because why would they put their name with our name? We just got started out as a business, right? So I think resource wise, being incredibly resourceful too, and then just doing a lot with very little, and knowing too that like the only downside if this weren't to work out would be the cost of the animator who made that gifographic, right? So like the downside wasn't that what it wasn't. The insurance policy was pretty strong, to be honest.
You had said something of value to the reader, to the viewer. How do you know what's valuable?
A few things we look at. We would look at like the time on site as one thing too, because there's so many leading indicators before you feel like you actually have a decent set of confidence around the quality of your content. So getting it published is one, right? Getting it then ranking is another. Getting impressions. So you can be on rank number 77 on Google, for example, and like you won't get many impressions. So getting that rank up, then getting the clicks, getting the CTR increase as well. Like how do you choose? How do you lead with a promise in the headline that actually gets a higher CTR by people voting just based on the data alone? And you can look at that through Google Search Console. And then how do you deliver on that promise by keeping the time on site and the scroll depth as well too? That's kind of how you know you have something going on. Leading indicator wise, like the lagging indicators would then be close one revenue from that traffic, or at least part of the journey, right? So, and before that happens, you have a conversion that needs to happen and things like that as well too. So those were things where we started looking at individual blog posts as like individual marketing campaigns, and we treated them like as if they were a landing page. And we would split test things. We would figure out what hooks would be important. And it was, again, also the 80-20 rule, because we were not sophisticated in terms of tofu or mofu or bofu kind of traffic. We treated it all as is. We just wanted coverage. And then we kind of figure out where our moneymakers were on the roulette table. And then we doubled down and put more effort into those once we figured out that they actually work. But we started off by just being a heavy bias towards action, so to speak.
If I'm understanding that correctly, you were sort of testing out some of these concepts on your own site before you were going out into the world and saying, hey, let's do this with you, because we already know that. For us, it was the ROAS, or not ROAS, it was talking about the product listing ads. You had already tested that concept out and then said, all right, now let me blow this up and make it bigger. Does that sound about right?
Different topics, exactly. So we had one that we did ourselves. Then we went to our go-to partner at the time, which was Unbounce. And we created this like AdWords workout routine gifographic. So it was like a set of 3 different gifographics that had different workout inspired, like, hey, if you only have 15 minutes to get your workout in, equivalent to like optimizations in a Google Ads account, what would you do and why? And so we kind of had like, okay, people already like it from our website. They like it even more on the Unbound site. Now let's take that. And it was the same thing we kind of did with case studies and get new clients. It was like, if we couldn't close a deal, we would say, well, why don't we do it for free? But in exchange, if we hit a goal, we get a case study from you. And then we'll take that case study and we'll level up. So we just kept doing that with other and be like, hey, X amount of companies have already said yes to doing this gifographic with us. What will it take for you to get to say yes as well too? So yeah, we had some insight that it was already popular.
And it's just leverage and leverage and leverage and leverage overall, over again.
Exactly.
I think that's brilliant. I don't think a lot of people really think about the leverage in that way. Now, I'm going to switch topics because this is actually like a nice little segue. Tell me about your process for ideation. How do you create a piece of content from ideation to publication? And it doesn't have to just be like the gifographics or back then.
Yeah.
Like, what's that look like now? How are you ideating and delivering the big stuff for your clients nowadays?
I think we eat a lot of our own dog food. So we practice a lot about what we preach ourselves to. Tools have been, again, not just great usage of value, because the time spent on site, and then people in an anecdotal way also tell us that they found that to be valuable. That also becomes a massive backlinkable asset on top of that as well too for us. And so this is where we're now creating the stock charts I mentioned of the average cost per clicks or cost per conversions in different ad platforms with our own data from our own 200 active clients. We then also create, let's say, typeform style quizzes as well, marketing maturity assessments as well too. And they might just be very much quickly created in a typeform environment first, prove that it works, and then we can spend the time developing it to be like formally on our own site as well too. But that's kind of how we look at it, like what's out there, and how, because we also have a brand that kind of allows us to be a little bit wild, we can do a lot of crazy things like how much butt does your marketing kick? And it's a scale of like a grandpa butt with like heart-shaped boxers and Godzilla butt cheeks on the other end. And then in between those two polar opposites, there's like a different range of how much butt your marketing is kicking. But then we'll ask you questions that kind of like, okay, besides the fun and the jokiness, we're actually like about our business and like we can actually diagnose you pretty well as well too.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. And when you have clients coming to you, what are those conversations looking like? Because clearly you're doing a lot of really cool stuff on your own, but when they start coming to you and saying, hey, we want to do these types of things, what does that look like? How are those conversations going?
They're attracted by it, but they're not able to replicate it because they don't have a brand that allows them to do that most of the time. So we'll have to water it down. But what they do like is that we're coming out with new things that we're kind of like pushing the envelope a little bit or just thinking, hate to say outside the box, but like, and we actually then have data to prove it. They're like, hey, this is like the safe next best thing to do. And some of them are in content form, some of them are in ad form, some of them are on conversion optimization form as well too. And so it helps that we kind of have the sandbox environment for our own brand, but also our clients that are saying like, hey, we're willing to do 80% of what you guys are doing yourselves, not the crazy stuff. So take us there and let's see how we're doing. And then maybe we can go further later on.
All right. And then tell me a little bit more about the life cycle of a piece of content. So you've got the ideation, you've got that conversation going. What's it look like once you start to get into production?
Yeah, like the ideation, one thing I forgot to mention too, and it's really hard because you got to look at what type of content is your competition already producing. And it's pretty easy and quick to see where the bar is. And then I use a filter like, who's going to give a shit about this piece of content? Like, is it actually going to be a value for them? Or is it just, are we just trying to be funny? Like, can it be funny and educational at the same time? Anything that's like conditional logic related, where we can create a tool, Typeform is a great low cost tool that can easily brand for what we need as well too. So that people can see that it's Typeform, but they don't necessarily have it plastered all over. So, and then other times we just go all in. On the stock chart example, when we had to create like the average cost per clicks for different ad platforms, there was no real way to kind of like put a little thing in the water and see if it floats or see if it sinks. And so we just had to like focus on the resources that needed for that. But what we also had was we could see some competitors, both agencies and software companies that had something similar. And we can look at like Ahrefs and we can extrapolate like the SEO value that asset was creating for them too. And it was enough for us to be like confident, like, hey, we should do that. And we should get going in terms of like prioritizing our resources for this.
I think that's great because there's a boatload of research that's going into this stuff ahead of time. And I know that with a lot of companies that I've worked with, it's kind of like, okay, they're looking at, okay, here's the competitive research from like, we know what keywords people are going after, but I don't necessarily see a lot of going deep into what people are actually saying or doing, or at least it's very superficial. And what you're saying is like, not only are you looking at what are they doing, but you're also looking at how are they doing it, and then going, okay, let's do this like way, way different, which I think is great. And that's how you guys have been able to grow as much as you have. All right, so let's take that a step further. All right, so the thing is created. You've done the research. The thing is created. Now what?
We obviously make sure that it functions the way it needs to, and we publish it. To be honest, I don't value a ton of research when I know that I would call like a pre-mortem. Like, what's the worst thing that can happen by focusing on this one thing? And if all it is a few resources wasted, then I'm like, well, no, keep printing as much as we possibly can and keep placing the roulette table bets across to see what actually has traction and what doesn't. I think too much time and resources is spent overthinking things in the research phase. And if you have enough insight from sales conversations and what matters to your prospects, that's essentially where our research lives and dies right now. We don't go far beyond that. And so it's like, okay, nobody is like sending a manned mission to the moon from a marketing perspective in terms of resources that it costs. So all of these things are pretty inexpensive and pretty quick as well too. And if the worst can happen and I'm okay with that, then I'm going to take as many bets as I possibly can, right? Because I just want to learn faster as well too. And there's a little bit of Sean Ellis. I call him my marketing uncle. You can't call him a grandpa because he's not that old yet. But he's also here from Orange County, California. And when Growth Hackers was very popular in the community and speaking at their events as well too. It's just like it was the volume and the velocity of these tests that of course had some level of logic in the prioritization, but it wasn't never going to break the bank, right? And so we all we needed was one of those things to pay off out of 10 or 20. And we just found a well that we can keep excavating from. And that was enough. And that was been my mindset as well too. So I'm very much, like I mentioned earlier, very biased to action. Stop thinking about it. Just go do. And let the data, once it's live, tell us what to believe of it.
We had the strategy that we used when we had the big swing concepts that we wanted to go after. We'd use a tool called Pitchbox and pitch it to a bunch of different outlets, right? A bunch of different bloggers at bigger publications and whatever. And we'd throw 3 of these large, cool concepts out at them. We'd do the ideation, we'd do the research, we'd figure out what would be valuable or what we thought would be valuable based on what we saw, then threw that out there and had a threshold for acceptances on these particular pitches. And it was like, if 20 people say they're going to accept concept B, that's what we're going to put into production. And then we know we have built-in distribution as well. And then we go hard on the actual producing of it. So I just thought I'd throw that out there in case anybody wants to use that. If you want to use that, go for it. Now it's in the world.
I want to challenge people listening too is if they look at their output, so to speak, in terms of, let's use the roulette table as an analogy, right? And placing different bets, how much of those different bets look like there's a clear variety in those bets? And they're not just like one piece of content after another. And if you're asking somebody who wasn't in your ICP or your industry and you're like, hey, what's the difference? What do you see as a difference between these pieces of content? And all they're saying, well, it looks like the headlines are different, like the topics may be different. Then you maybe aren't pushing hard enough because at the end of the day, like our job as marketers is to create memorable experiences and be unique, because it's not everybody who's looking for your service or your offering today. And how can you actually bridge that gap by just, again, being a little bit more confident and a little bit more aggressive in the bets and the swings that you're taking as well too. Less planning, maybe less research, that may be going against what you're thinking, Tommy, as well. But I want to give it another point of view too, that if the worst case scenario can happen is you're just wasting a few resources. My question will then be, well, how many resources can we waste? Because if we're okay with that, then let's go ham on this.
How are you encouraging that from a culture perspective? Because I know that at a certain point, at a certain scale, and you guys have grown massively in the last few years, it can be really easy to default to safe. How are you making sure your team doesn't do that?
I feel like everybody does default to safe. And they just kind of maintain. And so as a leader, your job is to kind of show them and point at if you're at level 1 today, what does level 2 look like, level 3, level 4, like an evolution of whatever you can isolate that somebody does in their role. And for content marketers, I hate to say it, but like having a CEO that's already pretty much like not afraid of taking bets, has a brand that allows for risky things to be done as well too. You kind of have like this baked in approval process already as well. Now, whether or not that person is creative, whether or not they think about like that pre-mortem correctly, they're like, they have an idea, but then I kind of spot out like, oh, all these things would also need to be true, which would actually utilize other people's time that are internally doing, let's say, client work, that might not be the best use of their time right now, because I know what they're prioritizing, right? So those are the things too. But I think it's showing by doing, and then asking them as well too. I call this non-judgmental curiosity. Knowing what we've done within this brand of KlientBoost, what would you recommend we do that isn't just publishing another piece of content or another blog post? Like if you had complete freedom, Bob Ross, blank canvas, what would you do? And then allow them. And then you actually, even if you don't like the idea, but you also know that it's not like damaging to the brand, you got to let them have the at bat and build that muscle and that confidence to know that like you're there to support and improve. And then hopefully they can be the creator of these new ideas that actually just becomes like the main source, and not from you and telling them what to do.
It sounds a lot like kind of the Pixar method that, they really like, they try to encourage as much as possible, and then they'll let their they'll do the brainstorm sessions and have idea pitches, and then the ones that they really like, they'll let them do the shorts, right? Like, and I think that's kind of what you're talking about. It's very similar, where it's like you're trying to encourage that creativity and push people, push themselves over time.
Yeah.
And from a client perspective, right? Like you probably don't have to push your clients too hard because that's what you're known for, or is it kind of a different scenario?
So we have account managers that are like the quarterback of the client relationship, right? And so they come from other agencies. They may have bad habits as well too. But like the main reason why a lot of clients leave agencies, they don't feel challenged. They don't feel like we're being proactive. And I think a lot of people are afraid of coming with recommendations saying like, hey, we're on track to hit your goal, or we hit your goal. Here's an opportunity. You would have to spend more money, but we know that by spending that money, you would get X amount more revenue. Like we have the calculation already done, right? And so they're so afraid that they come across as like salespeople, as an example, where no, it's just like the client wants that. And you can also pose it as a question. You can say, would you want me to be proactive about ideas that I'm coming with or seeing from the data of other clients? And clients can be like, yeah, of course. And then you can follow up and say, would you be okay if some of those ideas may come with you having to spend more money? But rest assured, I'm going to make sure it makes business sense for you to do that. Yeah, like clients want to grow, right? So if something's working and they can put more money and resources, put some gas in the fire, whether that's paid ads, content, CRO, doesn't really matter, right? Like they want you to be proactive. They'll say no, budget doesn't allow it right now or whatever too, but you will never not be felt like you're being proactive or a strategic partner as well too. So clients have a lot of shit that they deal with in their day to day. And so having something where like they have to follow up with you would be absolutely detrimental. So we try our best to make our clients a bottleneck and have them be like seen as a frustration to us because we're not able to move as fast as we would like, right?
I mean, you're in service to the client, but it is a symbiotic relationship in a lot of ways. And I think that level of positioning and encouraging that pushback is a very good thing. All right, so we have a few
Yeah.
minutes here before we need to break into the edit. Tell me about your process or your pregame before you sit down to review anything that you produce.
It's very fast. If you haven't like noticed where I'm going right now as well too. Editing, I'm not so worried about it because I think a lot of people can make a lot of mistakes. There can even be misspellings, there can be things that aren't flowing correctly. And this is your world as well too, where there may be brand guidelines where like a CFO reads a piece of content, they're like, what the fuck is this? And internally it raises a massive alarm. That happens a lot, by the way. And whereas I'm like, well, I'm the ultimate decision maker on what I'm letting be okay and what not okay. And so for me, it's like ship that shit. Like we can adjust it on the fly. We can catch the spelling errors once we're live as well too. Because I want Google to index that page as fast as possible, right? Like I'm thinking of like the business impact. And so again, 80-20 rule. There's a lot of things that I'm just like very lax about when it comes to that too.
Nice. And I think we've actually heard that quite a bit from the smaller companies that have been on recently. Lauren Finaro was a good one. She's over at Scribe. Eric Doughty over at Doc was saying the same thing, is they basically try to ship as much as possible. And then anything that starts to get that traction, that's where they're going to double down on it. And, they want to get the good amount of stuff. Like, let's get this stuff ranking if they're going after search and then go from there. And I think that's
if nobody reads that blog post or piece of content that you spent 3 hours editing because it doesn't rank anymore, like, was it good use of time? No. Business acumen, business sense wise, obviously there's different thresholds between cultures and stuff like that, like what like needs to be buttoned up. The bigger the company, as you probably are mentioning as well too, because those are smaller company examples, they're going to have more red tape and it's going to be slower and longer because they have a brand reputation they need to keep as well too.
Yeah, I've definitely had that experience at the larger organization. It definitely, the production cycle changes quite a bit depending on scale. So I think what's really cool is that you guys are able to do that even as you've been scaling and growing. All right, so let's take it away. The article's name is How to Stand Out Online. I wanted to make sure that it was something that was relevant to the conversation we're having. What was your first impression of the piece?
I thought ChatGPT wrote this, to be honest.
Yeah.
Is that true?
No.
Did it? No? Oh my God, I'm gonna ruin somebody's day.
Don't hold back. Don't hold back.
All right. I thought some of the main bullet points were very much like, yeah, of course, that's like 101 kind of stuff as well too. And I think secondarily is like, well, how do you do that? And what are you looking for when you do that? So if you're not speaking to everyone or you're identifying your customers' problem points, like how do you go about that? And what value do you put on something like the second bullet point of like identify your customers' problem points? everybody knows that's a good idea, but has anybody ever come out with like, hey, we did this, here's how we did it, and here were the before and after results of our content, or we took this content and we also changed our sales approach and now we have a higher close rate. Like, what's the business impact that these, seemingly no-brainer kind of recommendations are giving you,
Yeah. Yeah. I thought something very similar where, as we scroll down just a little bit more, you can see our first bullet point here is don't speak to everyone. Okay. That is some 101 stuff, but let's go into your comment over here because you go into each one of these points really well. You can read your comment though.
Okay, I'll do it. The first thing, even before I read the comment, it's like your content that you're creating usually is around a topic, right? So by default, when you're narrowing in on that topic, you're already not speaking to everyone. It's impossible to speak to everyone unless you are writing a piece of content around oxygen and breathing and drinking water, because everybody does that, right? So your topic is most likely already, so you don't need to overthink that, in my opinion. And then the other part is going to be, when you are looking at the competition of whatever content, either it's going to be content through the Google search results, right? Like there's a focus keyword around your blog post, so to speak, or another piece of content as well. What is the competition creating and why quantitatively and qualitatively is your content going to be better? I need to believe that. I need to believe your logic. And that's why I use that lemonade stand principle too, is like, why would people stop at your lemonade stand? Are you using organic lemons because everybody's using non-organic lemons? Is your outfit much cooler? Is your sign much better? Is your pricing different as well too? Like, give me a long list of why your content or your lemonade stand is going to be so much stronger in your belief before you even start publishing that content. Like, what's the plan that you're going with, right? That's what that one speaks to when it comes to the lemonade stand principle.
I like the lemonade stand principle. Just a little segue there. My youngest son likes to do a lemonade stand every year, and other kids, since he started doing it, other kids started popping up too. And now he's like, okay, well, now can I build like an official lemonade stand instead of having a table? And let's get my own embroidered apron. And he's like, let's do Leo's lemonade. That's exactly what you're talking about. He's trying to stand out now that other people have jumped into the market with him because his $1 thing of lemonade, he wants to show his customers that it's going to be a little bit better. Okay, so let's get more specific here. Don't speak to everyone. This is where design, first impressions, quantitative and qualitative data feedback loops are incredibly important. Let's keep talking about that a little bit more. So tell me, how are you not speaking to everyone? Like, let's flesh that out a little bit more.
Let's say that we're creating content around Google Ads. Like that was the main bread and butter ad platform from us when we started, right? So already immediately, we're really only creating content to the people who are interested about that topic within Google Ads. Now, you can also narrow that down and say, well, I'm doing Google Ads just for, SaaS companies or universities or law firms, whatever it may be. Yeah, like that depends on the focus keyword of the content that you're writing, right? That happens as well too. So for me, this kind of goes down into like further bullet points as well. It's like, I wanted coverage. I wanted to place as many bets on that roulette table as possible. And I just wanted to get eyeballs because I knew that we had a formula of easily outranking our competition just by the listicle approach. Like we just had more points. And so our content was beefier and it was longer and it seemed to have more perceived value before you even clicked in to read the article. Not that everybody would read the entire article. So that's kind of where we started. So coverage was like the number one goal. And we made sure that quality in our mind was just like, we had more examples. Like we had a longer listicle. That was our quality bar. And if we can do that, then spread out as many quantities as we can in terms of content.
And at the time when you were doing that too, I think that the longer is better principle was definitely starting to be in play. So I think that doing that research was definitely important. All right, so we're going to identify our customers' problem points now. Go for max coverage. You don't care if it's tofu, mofu, bofu. This is kind of the same idea, right? You want to have more coverage. Now, when it comes to identifying the customers' problem points, we've kind of covered that already, but like, how would you flesh this out just a little bit more?
I think it's the same point as like the one above in terms of like who's coming out with the data on this of what they've done and how is it different from like, let's say like a regular keyword research? Because my assumption is the thing that people type in are the problems, the pain points that customers have, potential customers, because they're searching for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if there's a higher volume of keyword searches for one keyword versus others as well too, that just shows me like how common that pain is. The competitive nature is also important, but I think a lot of people are like, no, we need to create like tofu, mofu, or bofu and like start at the bottom of the funnel and work our way up. What we found, and again, this is just going back to who's producing the data that says one way is better than the other. We don't see a lot of that data out there. And so it's a lot of these like inherited, expected, assumed best practices. We have a ton of like what we call tofu content that are almost like is a, you know, the definition of a certain word within LinkedIn ads or Google ads or whatever it may be. And you would assume that a lot of people don't like convert for a demo. You would assume that tofu content equals that they need to be on a newsletter and get nurtured over time. And I'm like, who here is telling us that person couldn't immediately be a client of
Mm-hmm.
ours, right? So all of our entire blog, if you go to it, there's like 3 different parts to it. One's a pop-up, one's a sidebar, one's at the top before you even start reading the blog post, a piece of content that we're saying, get a marketing plan from us. And our marketing plan is like our low bottom of funnel demo equivalent, right?
Yep.
And it works. It works incredibly well. So it doesn't matter if it's tofu, mofu, or bofu. I don't know if the person's searching for that pain, if they also could be a great fit for our client. Like there's just a lot of assumptions that we've made. So to go back to like the identify your customers' problem points, the keyword research is telling me the market that has the most problems that people want to know about because they're searching for it. There isn't a lot of meat on the bone that I found when you have like sales conversations that aren't also in the Venn diagram of like the regular keyword research too. It's hard to see the difference.
Something I've been trying to encourage folks to think about too is that one problem often spirals out to a bunch of different problems. And what I see in a lot of content out there is addressing just the one problem on its face, right? So my major thing, my best go-to example, because I think anybody in marketing has written this article at one point, was how to build a landing page, right? I am convinced that every single marketing person has written this article.
We have that listicle. It's 72 points on how to build a landing page.
And one of the things is like, I've seen this with software companies that are landing page building softwares, right? It'll be like, make sure you have, good headline, solid body copy, make your images, compelling, forth and so on. And on the surface, that definitely does answer some of those questions. And sure, maybe it solves the problem pain point. But what it doesn't do is tell you that getting really solid product photography can be pretty expensive, and finding the right copywriter is also, going to be a challenge, and all the number of things that actually go into that. So when someone says to me, like, identify your customers' problem points, makes sense, but don't just pretend that the article that's being written or the video or the podcast or whatever, that's going to be the thing that solves the problem. You want to think about the layers of conflict that are going to happen as we're trying to figure out that topic, because 2 things. One, they might get to the end and realize, hey, I can't solve this problem on my own, which in that case, they're going to sign up for your marketing plan, right? Or they're going to go, this problem's way bigger than I thought, and then dive deeper because you've got research that goes in a bunch of different areas. That's what we did on the Shopify Plus blog. I wanted to make sure that, I wanted somebody to have 15 tabs open by the time they were done, because one problem always leads to another.
That reminds me of your conversion Excel time too, right? It was so well researched, and like you would not find another piece of content on that topic that was more robust, more work being put in than that as well too. And essentially it's like first party data, listicle form, whether or not you're naming 1, 2, 3, 4, like you're just giving more value. And now you have the qualitative aspect. Like if you're on a sales call and you seeing that last touch attribution brought that person in to be a sale or a demo or whatever, and you're then asking them, well, how did you hear about us? Well, oh, I read this blog post. Cool. Now you have a piece of evidence. So like that was worthwhile the effort, right? Because some people, you will also find that, yeah, sure, you can get some traction by just regurgitating content out there and not going deep. We do this all the time. We have these questions to our prospects that come in, and funny enough, one of them was actually like a relocation software company that, like, for bigger organizations, if they want to move 10 people to another geography, they would want to attract those decision makers in HR or whatever the job titles are within their ICP. But we found that a lot of their content was like the TripAdvisor, like the travel guide to Berlin or something like that. And so we're then asking them, have you guys done any like a reverse IP reveal on your content, like to see who actually reads your content? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, that's a good idea to figure out if you're even hitting the market, because anecdotally, from my point of view, this looks like a TripAdvisor, kind of like your B2C when you want to go B2B here. So could all that effort been saved in terms of resources because you've done this for years now, right? And so when we show that kind of pain, clients are like, fuck, like we need to stop what we're doing immediately and like start doing this and making sure that we can see which companies, hopefully they're within our ICP, are actually reading our content too.
Yeah, and I don't even do that level of research with the reverse IP lookup. So I mean, that's
it comes from our ad side that we kind of like learned that, like, okay, if we are not sure if it's anything outside of LinkedIn ads, right? Because LinkedIn, you can do LinkedIn level targeting of like B2B, but natively in Facebook and Google and Reddit and all that kind of stuff, if you are B2B, for example, and you need to make sure that, like, well, before we even get a conversion, before we even get a demo request, are we even sure that like the right type of companies are coming through? Because if they're all mom and pops and we want to go more enterprise, well, then we can quickly pull the plug on this effort, right? Because ads are pretty quick to put up and quick to turn off. On the content side, it's such a snowball like thing in terms of, like, let's say written content or blog content, that if you own where the content is being consumed, like your website or things like that, well, now you can start tracking that. You can start seeing if those people are actually going to be the right in your ICP. And if they're not, don't keep going for 6 months and just cross your fingers, because that's what, let's say, the SEO or content agency has told you to do. Like, have some insurance policies along the way as well too.
now from a qualitative perspective, right? Because we've got a lot of quant data that we're talking about right there. From a qualitative perspective, how are you also validating both?
This is where, speaking of PEP, for example, winter.com is one way you can do that. In whatever B2B audience you have, he probably has a focus group that you can maybe run a test. I don't actually know if it's like a content test you can do. It's more like messaging.
Yeah, it's message testing and visual hierarchy too.
Yeah. But I'm wondering if like he can run a test like that, as long as the dollars make sense. I'm sure he would. And then there's also other things like, usability hub is a good thing to kind of just get like a preference test as well too. And I would also recommend like recruiting your own little focus group circle.
Mhm.
Like, take 5 people who are on your ICP and say, hey, maybe once a month I'll pay you up to $500. So it's gonna $100 an hour or half an hour. Like, make it lucrative. Obviously, make sure you know that if they get paid a lot more than an hourly equivalent, like, your offer has to be much better, obviously, for them to care about it. But that's another great example of like giving unbiased, feedback to you, where you want them to be your clients, but you don't have an expectation, and they're just going to give you some raw feedback. So many people don't interview customers or do close loss analysis on a regular basis either. And so to be a little bit more proactive and have like a little, it can even be your current customers, right? That's like you can use if you already have the relationship. But a lot of people don't do that to create these insurance policies for their content they're creating.
I'm actually engaged with a client right now, and one of the first thing that we've done, right? Our goal is to start creating together a content code, some brand guidelines, like not necessarily like articles need to be 850 words or whatever, right? It's more along like,
Right.
what's the vibe that we're trying to go for, and we're reverse engineering some of the things that we're finding in our conversations with our clients to then go, we're dissecting the client conversations, finding out what types of archetypes they might come out of them, right? They're going after Jungian archetypes, and then tearing apart, landing pages from other companies and saying, like, how are they going after the logical element of their argument? How are they going after the emotional element? How are they going after authority,
Yeah.
right? Logos, ethos, and pathos, if you want to go back to AP English stuff. And
Yeah.
and that's what knowing your market is about. It's not just knowing the customers, it's knowing like everything that's going on all around, so you can see, like, my whole like marketer catchphrase is, if you know where the tides are turning, then you can be the one that controls the weather, right? It's
Yeah.
and I think that's something that you guys have done brilliantly. and something that I think we should all strive to do a little bit more. All right, get back to basics.
Yeah.
Let's get in here. Get back to basics.
Yeah, I think for this one, again, very common knowledge. It's who's voting with their dollars in what you're doing. And if you don't have a feedback loop being built to prove that, then you will never really be confident that like your efforts have a business impact, right? So we talk about the close loss analysis, we talk about the customer interviews, um, and that should also influence like the sales team and what they're doing, what you're learning as well too, because for me, having the bias towards more action and knowing that like I did that pre-mortem, again, the opposite of post-mortem, like what's the worst that could happen? And if I'm okay with that, go, right? Well, then I don't need to do a lot of research. I know that I will get the ultimate data once I see people voting with their time, consuming the content, or converting on the content. And so I just need more things, more pieces of candy in my candy store to see what people pick, or more food items in my buffet to see what people consume, right? And then I can create more of that as well too. If I spend too much time asking, deliberating, all that kind of stuff too, and I'm putting out 4x the amount of content that you are, and I'm learning as I'm going with the most valuable feedback, which is like the live action type of feedback, well, then I feel like that's more powerful than what research I can do before then as well too. Because now we're talking voting with dollars versus voting with answers and opinions and stuff like that.
Yeah. And this, I mean, this, what they're saying in here is not necessarily off, but choose the top 100 people that will dramatically impact your business. Now connect with them in a real and meaningful way. If I were editing this article, I would ask, what does that mean? How do you do that? What's going on here? Like,
show me the before and after. Like what, okay, you found 100 people dramatically impact your business. Like I'm assuming from a customer client perspective, hopefully, or is it an advisor perspective? And then connect with them in a real and meaningful way. From there, keep it simple. Get to know what they like. I'm like, okay, you could probably be a little greedier, and you can figure out like, what can I do? These are my goals for my company. You're one of the top 100 people in your space. Can you help me with that if I do something that will help you? And that could just be paying you, for example, right? Like you can almost have a Trojan horse style relationship where they get to know you. You can podcast interview them, whatever you want. And then hopefully they can also become advocates or customers in the future as well too, because now you're really close to the people who are going to be voting with their dollars as well. On top of that, I think that you have to bridge the gap of like, you're not sitting behind a computer and just typing and creating content. You're actually engaging, and the content is now conversation with those people as well too, right? Because you're learning from them faster. So I think it misses the meat of this as well too. And again, there's a lot of things I can prioritize here. Which one has the biggest impact that I've seen, and where's the data to support that as well too? I don't see that.
Yeah, I mean, on the surface, this is exactly the type of thing you did early on, right? You chose your top handful of people that would help you distribute your company and connected with them in a really meaningful way. But I would love to see an example from this, exactly what you're saying. There are plenty of case studies out there. There are plenty of you can have conversations with companies that have grown. Look out there, and from 0 to 20 million ARR, right? What's that look like? How'd that person do it? Tell that story.
So we have one that was really good, and it was part of using the leverage example from earlier. So when we started out, we didn't have a strong domain rating like any domain has, because it's not live yet, don't have a lot of backlinks, there's not a lot of history. And so we piggybacked off of Unbounce a lot. And Unbounce had like the perfect audience for us because they were landing page conversion optimization focused. We were that, but we were also paid ads centric as well too. And so we came out with a blog post that says, you're doing Google AdWords wrong, when it was called AdWords back in the day. Here's how to do it right. So it was like a contrarian post, but with plenty of data as well too. And I think it took us from like 0 to like the first $60,000 of monthly recurring revenue. One blog post. We then did the same thing, same focus. I forgot what it was. There was some other focus keywords that we're doing, and we went to CXL, funny enough, and we posted a blog post there. Then we created our own version of that. We called it single keyword ad groups, and we started writing about it. And so over time, the blog, so we coined something. We coined a term, single keyword ad groups. We stole it from other companies that had done something similar, but we just called it that specific thing. We're like, we're going to run with it. We're going to make it famous. And we were like number 1, 2, and 3 on the Google search results for single keyword ad groups, but it was like 2 guest posts and our actual 1 blog post too. So this became a new tactic strategy for a lot of people in the industry, and like they loved it, and it kind of catapulted us as well too. But we were using the audience that was there, leveraging a yes from unbalanced, and then go to CXL and like kind of rinse and repeat over time as well.
And something that I feel like is missing from here, and something we're not even talking about with what you did early days and still what you do now, one of my axioms for content is a good premise will get you 80% of the way there. And what you're doing when you're creating meaningful conversations like this person saying is you're coming to the table with a solid premise of, hey, here's not just what I want to talk about, but how we want to talk about it. And this is something that based on my research I've done and whatever. And that's how you develop your premise for any of that stuff. So not only do you, if you want to create meaningful conversations, right, which is, you have an here, it's to bring something to the table, even if, because I didn't know you, right? I think a lot of the people you reached out to didn't know you, but you came with a really solid idea that it was like, I want to get to know this person because they got some cool stuff going on. It wasn't just, hey, can I do a blog post for you guys? Because you get those all the time. So, you're bringing something new to the table.
This was for like years back, right? When comments within blog posts was like more common, I feel like, than it is today as well. And one of the great examples of that, it would be, well, how many reactions did your content elicit in terms of reactions in a paid social, or sorry, in an organic social way, or comments within the blog post. So that one unbalanced example of that blog post, it had over like 200 unique comments on it, which was like unheard of, because people were like, this is the contrarian take. It makes a lot of logical sense. Thank you. Or I have some questions and all that kind of stuff too. So like, it became a meaningful conversation because it wasn't a monologue. It was now becoming a dialogue between ourselves and who our prospects could be as well too. And we strike gold doing that. And it was hard to kind of like have lightning strike twice doing that, because you would have to come up with more contrarian takes or first party data that solves a lot of problems, or things like that as well too. So like there's still a way to do that today. It may not be in a comment form on the blog post so you get the reactions, but it can be social shares, things like that as well too. Yeah.
And something to point out there too, because you're not giving yourself credit for this. You were also leaving gaps, not necessarily gaps in knowledge, but gaps intentionally encouraging conversation throughout that. So that's something to kind of point out, is that you can create these loops to get people to want to engage and to seed questions. And I think that's really important to really study if you don't know what that's all about. Can you give our audience just a few words of wisdom before we go? Like if we were to summarize all of this into one single thing, what would that be?
Raise the bar in terms of the quantitative and qualitative things you can do. Again, playbook from us was the design, the animation, the tool creation, things like that as well too. The bar is very low in all industries. Like everybody kind of comes back down to what the average is pretty quickly. So that's what I would start with. And then have more output. If the worst case scenario is that none of this actually performs at all, how much can you create? How frequently? And figure out what that is. And then start testing, because once things are live and they're published, now you actually get the data and the research that actually matters the most, not all the research you're trying to do prior to getting it launched as well too. So bias for action is what I would recommend.
I love that. And with that, we're going to wrap this episode. So thank you so much, Johnathan, for coming on. Thank you, audience, for attending live. We're going to have more of these coming up in the future. So pretty soon here, we have Ross Simmons coming on. We have a handful of other guests, which I'm really excited about. And if you want to join us, go to thecontentstudio.com/studio insider. You'll learn all about this and other things that are happening within the Content Studio, including the upcoming summit and some really cool stuff that we're talking about in terms of storytelling these days, using real actual filmmaking techniques and staying away from business to business as much as possible, and applying these concepts in a way that's actually useful overall. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming on, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much for watching. If you'd like to join us live, check us out any Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, and you can get access to our guests and be a part of the magic as the edits happen live. If you'd like to get any of the articles that were edited on the show, go to thecontentstudio.com/the vault. And while you wait, check out any of the other videos over here or over here to catch any previous replays. Thanks so much, and we'll see you in the next one.